Hey fellow historians!
My name is Elizabeth.
My name is Mariah, and this is the Back in My Day podcast. Both Elizabeth and I are graduates of New York University with bachelor's degrees in history.
Yep, and this podcast originally started as a school project, but we decided to continue educational episodes about history so that we and you guys could entertainingly learn about history. Hi everyone, and welcome back to our 1,000,001 episode of Back in My Day. Today we'll be talking about the occupation of Alcatraz, which is a topic that I'm not that familiar with, and I thought it was just a federal prison, but Mariah here is saying that there's more to it. So what exactly is the occupation of Alcatraz?
Well, Elizabeth, the occupation of Alcatraz was an attempt to turn over the island of Alcatraz into Native American possession. This occupation lasted from November 1969 to June 1971, but this demonstration failed, with the U.S. forcefully removing the protesters.
Okay, so that sounds around like 19 months?
Yeah.
Okay, so what led up to the occupation?
On October 28, 1969, the Indian American Center in San Francisco burned down. It was especially important. According to the Nonviolence Project, the center was where they kept their culture alive, housed medical help, legal services, and community spirits. This led Native American activists like Richard Oakes to look for a new space.
Oh, I understand. So this is where the island comes from.
Exactly. While I was researching, I found that the Native American activists used the Treaty of Fort Laramie to justify the right to occupy or own the land. According to History.com, the treaty was created around 1868 and stated that any unused or abandoned federal land would be returned to indigenous people.
I see where this is going. They wanted to head to the island because technically it should have been returned to them, yes?
Yeah. They wanted to use it as an island for refuge for Native American studies and other facilities dedicated to the Native American well-being. Native American activist Richard Oakes announced his intent to the press through a speech that is now called the Proclamation. On November 9, 1969, in this speech, Oakes also offered to buy the island with $24 worth of glass beads and cloth. Ironically, this was the same amount used to buy Manhattan Island from the indigenous peoples over 300 years ago.
So this is when the occupation started?
No. This occupation was actually symbolic for the Alcatraz Island. On November 20th, 1969, Oakes led a group of 89 Native Americans to head over to Alcatraz after ignoring repeated warnings about how illegal the occupation was. This was according to this is also according to History.com. But keep in mind, this group was composed of families and college students. According to the Nonviolence Project, this group called themselves the Indians of all tribes. When they arrived, they appointed roles, jobs, councils, etc.
Okay, so they set up shop and everything was smooth?
Well, in the beginning, sure, because they made it to the island and started off well. But there weren't many resources on the island, and only three functioning toilets.
Just 3?
And because of this, the group focused on getting supplies. The public initially greatly supported this initiative and donated resources to their cause. According to the Nonviolence Project, the Indians of all tribes created their own media center and started a radio program to spread awareness about the occupation and counter false information.
Okay, well, it sounded like they had a good start.
Yes, the government also agreed to peacefully negotiate with the IAT, the Indians of all tribes, even though they initially wanted them to vacate the island.
Ooh, sounds interesting. How did the negotiations go?
Well, everything went well until... Remember those college students I told you about?
Yeah.
Well, according to an article written by Evan Andrews on History.com, those students started going back to their institutions. This was around January 1970. This was detrimental to the movement because college students made up some of the core leadership groups of the occupation. With them gone, randoms that didn't value the cause replaced those that left. Randoms. According to the Nonviolence Project, this started a drug and alcohol culture on the island, which went against the original values.
Drugs? How did Richard feel about this?
Speaking of Richard Oakes, he's gone.
What?
His stepdaughter, Yvonne, died from falling from 3 flights of stairs. Yes, Richard Oakes and his wife ended up leaving the island. as stated by the National Park Service. Many of the original settlers complained about fighting over authority after Richard Oakes left.
Right, so, okay, with the leadership role in the area, did they lose some of their structure?
Well, according to the Nonviolence Project, yes, there were two groups within the occupation that fought over authority. While this was happening, though, the government saw no hope of resolving the situation diplomatically, so they decided to stand back but not directly intervene with the occupation. But they wanted to play a waiting game in hopes of the occupation dissolving. They did this through indirectly intervening. So they did things like disrupting the island's flow of resources, and they cut off the building's water and electricity.
Wow, and that's actually interesting because they didn't even have adequate supplies in the first place.
And that makes it worse. And what makes it worse is that a fire broke out on the island, and the government blamed them for the loss of historical architecture.
Wow, and it's looking like it's not turning out so good.
Eventually, more and more protesters left, and the government forcibly removed the last few that were left. Occupation ended on June 10, 1971.
I think this is actually pretty interesting because not a lot of people know about this, including me.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And even though the occupation wasn't totally successful and they didn't get the island at first, according to History.com, the occupation of Alcatraz was successful in galvanizing Native American activists. So, groups were later created for the Native American rights, and these groups staged occupations and protests at places like Plymouth Rock, Mount Rushmore, and other sites in America.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Well, thank you guys for listening to Back in My Day. Next episode is coming Thursday.
Yeah.